tonight, talking about producing. And we'll just give it a few more moments for people to trickle into the room. But we're so excited to have you. Thanks so much for coming and enjoying our panelists this evening. We'll also have opportunity for a little bit of Q&A. It's going to be a great event. Thank you all so much for being here. Hello, hello. I hope people are enjoying the heat if you're in Los Angeles, or perhaps more moderate weather if you are elsewhere. All right. Wow, this is incredible. It's so amazing to have so many people here. We're thrilled to have you. Why don't we go ahead and jump in, because so many of you are so punctual and right on time. My name is Maikiko James. I am the Director of Programs at WIF in Los Angeles. And this is our April speaker series, Producing a How-To. We thought it timely, as we are also thrilled to be launching WIF's newest program, Emerging Producers, which will support a class of 9 rising producers through mentorship and master classes. And we'll be announcing those participants publicly very soon, but we're so excited about that new program coming your way. As always, we're extremely grateful to the City of West Hollywood and WeHo Arts for their support of our speaker series. They've been our supporter for many years now, and we couldn't do it without their partnership. And without further ado, let's get into the panel. Our panelists tonight are an incredible, illustrious group of amazing women producers who've been in the field for a very long time. They include April Speaks, Yolanda Cochrane, Nina Yang Bon Jovi, and Denise Davis. And of course, when we thought about how we wanted to present this particular panel, we had only one person who we wanted to go to as moderator, and that is Moira Griffin. Moira Griffin is a producer and strategist based in Los Angeles. With New Bumper and Paint Filmworks, in partnership with writer-director Marshall Tyler. And BNP is a newly launched production company working to develop diverse auteur creators across all platforms while championing thought-provoking stories, showcasing the frailty and humanity of all people. She is the former executive director of production and creative labs for 21st Century Fox and former head of diversity initiatives at the Sundance Institute. As a producer and field producer, she's been with companies such as PBS, HBO, YouTube, NBC Universal, among others. She is one of the fiercest advocates I know and truly represents the present and future of the producing field. Moira, I will turn it over to you.
Hello, and thank you so much for that great introduction, Maikiko. And I am excited, truly excited to be with some of my favorite producers. I think that producing is a really difficult job, and I'm excited to talk about it. So we have Nina Yang Bon Jovi, Avril Speaks, Yolanda Cochrane, and Denise Davis. You guys can all unmute, yeah. Hello. And so what we're gonna do is do a quick sort of like go around. I want everybody to kind of introduce themselves, and we'll start with you, Nina.
Hi, everybody. I'm Nina Yang Bon Jovi. I'm a producer, diehard producer. A very difficult job, but I still do it. So I'm having a lot of fun talking about it, and hopefully more of you will join us in this producing realm and create stories. I run significant productions with Forrest Whitaker. We do both feature films and television.
Fantastic. Yolanda?
Hi, everybody. Yolanda Cochrane. I am a producer, production executive, have been through many different phases of producing and oversight of production on both film and television. I spent a great bulk of my career in features and worked for many years at Alcon Entertainment, where we did a lot of films that were distributed by Warner Brothers. In the most recent years, I've transitioned over to television and have been overseeing television both at Freeform, which is in the Walt Disney Television Group, and now I'm currently overseeing unscripted and scripted, as well as made-for-television movies and the Viacom Kids and Family Group.
Fantastic. Avril?
Hi, my name is April Speaks. I am a producer. I'm a director turned producer who I produced a film called Gin, which premiered at South by Southwest and was distributed by MGM. I just wrapped a project actually last week called Dottie and Soul. That'll be released sometime this year. I work primarily in film, but I'm getting into television as well. I've done some producing work for BET and TNT and some branded content as well.
Fantastic. And Denise.
Hello, everyone. My name is Denise Davis. I am also a film and television producer. I got my start coming up with Issa from the web series Awkward Black Girl and helped run her company with her HBO deal, which led to Insecure, which I produced with her, as well as Black Lady Sketch Show. And I also ran Color Creative, which was a company her and I started many, many moons ago that is now relaunched as a management company that I'm very excited about. But most recently, I launched my own production company, Reform Media Group, this year, and have been tracking my own journey to I keep calling this find my own voice as a producer. I've always been a producer for everyone else, and so I'm really excited to join this path and produce for myself for the first time, which is very scary but yet very exciting. So yeah, thanks for having me.
I love it. I love it. And I'm going to start with the sort of the basic but sort of honest question, which is, what does being a producer, right, mean to you, and why did you become one? And I'm going to start back with Denise.
Oh man, I liken the role of a producer to like a CEO or like a manager at any regular job in a lot of ways, because I just feel like you are just, yeah, you're in everything, to be honest. And it's part of the reason why I wanted to become a producer when I went to film school, and then I went to grad school at AFI and got my master's in producing. And so for me, what really attracted me the most out of every other position was that I felt like there is not one part of the process and when you're making content that a producer is not involved in. And I loved the idea of being in something and creating something from beginning, middle, and end in both the most creative way, but also in a business way and a very personable way that I think is unlike any other role in our industry. So that was my attraction, was that I didn't have to choose one thing. I got to be involved in all the things. So that's what I love the most about it.
Fantastic. And what about you, April?
I would agree with Denise in saying that it's kind of like a CEO/manager position in film. I think I got into it coming from directing. I was director, and for many years as an indie director who was doing everything myself, I was wearing a lot of hats, and I got to a point where I was too old for that. Like, I can't be doing that many things. And just wanted to focus on doing one thing. And I started producing. And what I really love about it is being able to kind of be behind the scenes and kind of focus on the nuts and bolts of making the project work. And I think having come from being a director, really understanding the importance of that and understanding how important that is for a director. And like I said, I think I kind of prefer this position because I get to still wear many hats, but at the end of the day, it's like what's on the screen, and that creative vision is with someone that I trust as a director, and they're putting that on the screen, and I'm there to help make it a reality. And I love the fact that there's a lot of things that I do that no one ever knows about and that no one ever sees. But just knowing how important it is that people appear on set and there's food and they get tested for COVID, like all these things that just magically appear on set. Just having a hand in making all those things happen. And I think that's what keeps bringing me back to producing.
Right. Nina?
From my end, I love taking an idea, a concept, an IP, a storyteller that I find super fascinating and that I haven't seen, and love championing it from development to raising the financing to physically producing, and then go through the entire process, see the end result at a film festival or premiere and just go, oh my God, I can't believe this. This is a miracle. And then on top of that, seeing like filmmakers just take on this business and shift the business and the culture of the business. So it's super rewarding to be able to have a hand in that process with the filmmakers that I've been so fortunate to work with, and then continuing to do that with the same concept and mandate in television, which is totally different, but being able to utilize those skill set and pushing it in the television world is pretty great too. So I feel like it's kind of an unglamorous job that some people don't want to get into, because I don't, many times we talk about, is producing sustainable? But I feel like we need producers because we are the people behind the scenes. It's like when you see someone very powerful, but the person behind, when they say there's a powerful person, there's someone really powerful behind, it's the producers who are holding it together. We're the ones holding up the sky when the production's gonna collapse, right? And quite rewarding in that process, but also very unglamorous, because when the film hits, it's really about the stars and the filmmaker, and then we just go, we'll quietly go to our next project and go, let's do it again. So it's that type of challenge that makes it fun, rewarding, never boring. So.
Love it. And then Yolanda, I want you to answer that question, but I also want you to sort of address the kind of different, right? The sort of difference in terms of your trajectory, because you are also an executive, right? So do you think, on top of sort of like, why a producer, why this sort of role, do you think that the best way to sort of become a producer is to also sort of go through the executive ranks as well? And why are, what sort of attracted you to that part of the business too?
Yeah, that's great. What has drawn me to be a producer, and a lot of the people that I kind of came up with in the business, we met when we were at school, and many of them were in film school, and I was not. And often I was told by them, you should produce. And I was like, well, I don't know. I don't know if that's really what I'm trying to do. I wasn't going to school for that, but I was running around doing that activity, that job. And quite frankly, I have an affinity for creatives, which is how I ended up in that group in the first place. I have affinity for, creative vision and being able to bring something to life on screen that has, some resonance. And what I have a strength in that part of the process is what everybody here has talked about, is bringing all that together, all that, bringing the pieces together, the project management portions of it and so forth. And so interestingly, I've had my foot one in direct production and one in, kind of on the studio side for almost the balance of my entire career. I mean, the bulk of it has been, on the executive side, but what ended up happening is I got out of that. And while I was working within the studio system, I was running around nights and weekends working production with all of my cohorts. And at various times even stepped away from studio work to do, to actually produce things, specifically my own personal projects, et cetera, et cetera. So it's been interesting. I would say that if your path is to directly produce, I don't recommend doing it from the standpoint of being a studio executive, because you don't get the full breadth of what it requires and all the functions and all the things you need to do. I mean, you see a bit of it, and I think my having been on both sides of it enhances my ability to effectively manage from a studio standpoint. But I wouldn't recommend trying to produce by getting a studio job.
Great. I mean, one of the things I definitely think that, I know we have a short amount of time, so I'm going to try to get in as many questions as possible. So my other question to you guys is, can you describe your relationship to the director that you're working with, depending on the project, right? But probably I would say maybe a director that you've worked with multiple times, or a creative that you work with multiple times. But can you kind of talk about that process from the beginning stage, right? So from when you're developing, what is that relationship like? through when you're on set through afterwards? Like what is sort of your role as a producer to do for your director, for your creative, especially when they have like different people kind of coming at them, you know, you're sort of dealing with the AD, you're dealing with the studio. What do you feel sort of your role as a producer is to do in terms of dealing with your director or dealing with your writer? What do you know, does that question make sense? I'd love to sort of talk that through a little bit. And we'll go to Avril because her mind just went, I saw her eyes go up. Avril?
I did. I was like, You know, it's interesting because I think for me, as an independent producer, it varies based on what type of job it is. There are some jobs that I'm kind of a work for hire where I'm essentially coming on set to, you know, to help run production. But in some of the director relationships I'm in, that where it's kind of more encompassing, where I'm on from beginning to end, I would say, I honestly, I think it's kind of like a marriage. Like you kind of have to really build trust with, it's like a relationship. Like you really have to build trust with that person. And that takes time. Like if I, you know, for example, Najla, who I produced Jin with, and we're still making films together. You know, it's just been many years of building a trust between the two of us. And that comes from a story perspective. That comes from, you know, just, you know, we're also friends as well. So just kind of knowing each other and knowing each other's habits and hangups. But yeah, I think trust is a big part of that relationship. And in terms of, you know, what my role is, a lot of my role is supporting the vision, is being there to support the vision. And that's from a creative standpoint, just as much as it is from, you know, the logistic and production standpoint. So, you know, it's like, you know, whenever Najla writes a script, you know, I read it and give notes and also just, I think for me, it's really important to know who your director is and kind of understand their point of view that they're coming from. That's something that's really important to me because often, you know, people come in and start giving notes based on like your own thing or based on what you're trying to do. But I try to really be supportive of the filmmaker and what's the message that they're trying to portray. And I do think that in kind of those long-term relationships, those long-term partnerships, you just get to a point where you kind of know their likes and their dislikes, you know their backstory, their family story, and you know the place that this is coming from. And then you can kind of help guide the project based on that. But it's like also you're walking this fine line too as a producer in terms of looking at the market, looking at, you know, how will this film perform? And then hopefully kind of bridging the gap. And like part of bridging that gap is, you know, through story, through casting, and kind of building that team. So for me, I guess I would sum it up and just say it's being that support for the director for them to be able to realize their vision. But that to me comes from building a rapport and building trust with that person.
That's great. And sort of building on that, and this is more of a question for Denise and Nina, you know, both of you, Denise, not, you know, now you're sort of on your own, but both of you also work with talent. What is that? How does that relationship, you know, sort of work for you or worked for you? How did you make it work for you as a producer? And, you know, sort of also, Denise, when you're now sort of going off on your own, what's the shift, right? So the first question is, I guess, going to be for Nina is, what is it like sort of working with talent? And then for you, Denise, right after that is, what is it like to sort of now kind of go off on your own and sort of be a producer, you know, sort of like, you know, solo?
So Forrest Whitaker's my producing partner, and I truly see him as the creative partner to my brain, because I think about world building, packaging, the business aspects, the logistical aspects to get something done. And I do give notes and I do talk about, you know, scripts and ideas and concepts with filmmakers. But when it comes to taking on an actual project, when I'm ready to go and I'm like, I got the option for this, we're going to make this film. And somehow I can't figure out certain aspects of, like, I can't nail why the third act isn't working. That's when I go to Forrest Whitaker and have him come in, because he himself is a filmmaker, an artist, an actor. So he sees it from so many different perspectives. And it's such a gift, because he's mentored Ryan Coogler, Chloe Zhao, Rick Famuyiwa, Michael Larnell, Boots Riley, and recently with Rebecca Hall. He actually quietly mentors all of them, give them great notes when it comes to scripts, give them notes if we run into situations on set with actors. It's like, how do we handle that situation? I call Forrest, and then he gives such creative notes during post-production when it comes to the different cuts that come through us, right? So it's a true partnership. I don't need him on set. I got that, right? So that's a true creative partnership. And it's different than like just working with one director. We love working with directors that have a really strong voice, a unique voice that needs to be launched, and then we let them out into the world. I mean, most of our directors, after they launch their feature film, their career is just crazy. So they get signed by Marvel, right? But for us, we're good. We're like, the consistency is that having that creative producing partner, the artist. So it's been 11 years since we have collaborated and started significant productions. We continue to find the common thread of what we want to do. And what we don't do is very simple: multicultural, authentic storytelling, period. So we are crossing over in Asian American, Pacific Islander stories, Native American, Latinx, we look for those voids that need to be fulfilled, and we go after it, and we'll use our strength to and lean into it and hopefully get the films made. So it's just a really nice creative partnership. But working with talent and artists, you also have to know their moods. It's very different. so if he's in character as Bumpy Johnson in Godfather of Harlem, I don't bother him about a business question. I'm gonna wait until the weekend. So.
Go ahead, Denise.
Yeah, I mean, I was over here just nodding my head to everything Nina said. So I'm like, yep, that's what it was like for me for many years, and in a way where it's almost like left brain, right brain, I think one of the beauties of my partnerships with Issa was this idea that you had a true collaborator, right? And someone who was like, oh no, I don't really look at the budget. You got that. Like, I trust you. Or, from the creative side to even doing something like Insecure, where she's on set 90% of the time, but also writing and producing and being able to, in some ways, speak for her when she can't be there, and really kind of help keep the train on the tracks. And, what's been really interesting is, I started my company and it was official as of January of this year. And I sent an email out January 1st. And then 2 weeks later, I was on the set of Insecure. So we're wrapping up this final season. And I, in a lot of ways, still feel like I have 1 foot in, 1 foot out, right? I'm like working on my own thing when I have the time. And then obviously still working with these on the side. But what's been most fascinating as I look at the differences of how I've operated as a producer for many years with Issa, and then how I'm operating on my own, is the fact that at the moment I'm on my own. And that's been the weirdest adjustment, to be honest, is to hear a pitch or read a script and go, oh, I love it. And I almost feel like I'm Mirror Issa, because I'm like having conversations with myself, debating about whether or not I want to do the project. Whereas in the past, it's like, I'm texting or calling her and we're having a whole creative conversation about whether or not we want to do it. And now I'm realizing like, oh, I make the decisions. Oh, this is weird. Because at the end of the day, that was Issa's company and she always had final say of the slate. And in this position, it's on me. And so again, this is a whole new journey for me of like, again, I keep calling it this discovery of voice as a producer, which I realize is incredibly important. I think whether you're in a partnership or you go on your own or you do it vice versa, but I think it's integral for any producer to understand who they are on their own in the sense of their own taste, their sensibilities. And in a lot of ways, I'm interested in the next few years to see, honestly, what my strengths and weaknesses are, because I've never really been in this position before, to see what I was gaining that was invaluable having a partner like her and what I'm losing from that, especially because our worlds are very much intermingled right now. So I still, in a lot of ways, haven't felt the absence of that partnership, but I know it's coming. And it's going to be an interesting exploration. And I'm very much tracking the differences, because it's been like I said, this whole thing has been new for me, and it's been really exciting. I mean, I helped grow Issa's company from when it was three of us to, I left and she had 30 employees, right? And it's been this incredible businesswoman in a lot of ways. And so if there's anything I took, it's also this idea of like, oh, I kind of want that too, and like if she can do it, I can do it, and that level of support across the board on a mutual level of fandom, I think has been phenomenal, and I say that with love because I'm sure as everyone knows in this industry, when you make such a big leap of faith, this industry can be ruthless. You don't get that type of support. And in this case, Issa was like, tell me how I can help. What do you want to do? Like, this, like, don't feel like you're doing this on your own because I'm still here. And at the end of the day, we are true business partners and own a company together. So it's been very amicable. And it's been hard to, again, to fully own my own right in the moment until we wrap the show. When we wrap the show, I might be crying in a corner, but for now I'm fine.
I love that. I think one of the things that we all sort of do when we're just starting out is we make a mistake. I think that my mistake when I was first starting out was thinking that I knew everything because I just did. But and you want to sort of do it on your own. You want to do everything on your own. I'd love to know, Yolanda, what was the sort of a mistake that you made starting out, in your career that when you look back on now, what kind of advice would you give yourself?
I think I was a little bit the opposite. I wish I had been a little bit more audacious and loud. And I have often said, particularly in forums that have involved women, is that I came into this business, I came to the town, I came to my, everything about my career, whether it was entertainment or not, thinking that, if you put your head down and you work hard and, that it's a meritocracy and people are just going to see you and, you're just going to automatically, you do good and you get a promotion or you get the next thing. And what I came to understand after too many years in it is that I should have been raising my hand. I should have been highlighting my abilities and my accomplishments and my value that I had to contribute, and that the places that I intended to go, I should have been speaking that, particularly to those individuals who could have been helpful to me to get there in a more accelerated pace, as opposed to, maybe kind of hanging back and assuming people were going to see, my value and invite me. Because unfortunately, what I came to understand after all those years, I looked around and there are people in the business who did get those opportunities, who were invited without asking, but those people didn't look like me, they didn't, all of those different things. So having learned that lesson, that's honestly, I reflect back and that's the biggest mistake I feel like I made early on in my career.
What about you, Nina?
Early mistakes were thinking that I had to adhere to what the business expected of me. I felt that I wasn't good enough because I didn't see other Asian American producers that were prominent in the business that were able to make change. So I felt that I should just try to fit in and try to be white adjacent, and thinking that was the way to go. And also being embarrassed of where I grew up. When I first started in the business, I was like, wow, everyone's like connected somehow in this business, or they come from a prominent family with prominent relations. And I just didn't have that. One of the mistakes, and I feel sad that I was too embarrassed to tell people where I grew up in LA, where, it was the hood. It was like La Puente, and I was too embarrassed to say that and not own up to it until I found my voice and confidence finally. But I didn't find it till later. It was like the first part of my career, first 8 years of my career, I was too nervous and trying to adhere to the rules of how to fit in. And then it was until I met Forrest Whitaker and we started developing a project together, he was going to give me an opportunity to prove who I am. And I remember in the first few months we started working together and started the company, he said to me, he's like, why are you so apologetic to people? You know, what, he's like, I brought in a general, so do your thing. And I always remember and I'm like, what? He goes, I will back you. And that really empowered me to not be shy and afraid to say what I feel, and to call out when something is wrong or inaccurate or unethical, just everything that comes to this business. But it was nice because I had to build that energy and strength and ownership, where it really works well in the producing realm, because as you build your experience and leverage in the business and you have that seat at the table, you can call it out and make that change. So it kind of, it's an evolution of it. So that was a mistake, is not having that confidence, but I think that it just came with the territory. I mean, Hollywood is a really intimidating place to come into when you have no connections.
Definitely. And then for you, Avril, I want to know, what's your biggest challenge now in your career?
My biggest challenge now, I would say, see you, I was so ready to answer the other question. My biggest challenge now, I think, is, so for me, I'm trying to make that transition from, doing, indie low budget films to doing more substantial budget, bigger projects. And I think, my challenge is, it's twofold. I think one of my challenges is, finding and developing the work that warrants that level of material. But I also think that my struggle, just my internal struggle, is trusting what I already know. I think you talked about wanting to know everything or appear like you know everything. And I have a problem with thinking that everybody else knows more than I do. And so that's kind of a challenge that I'm continuously trying to fight against. I've in terms of producing, I'm newer to producing, but I've been a filmmaker for over 20 years. So I do have, a lot of experience in this field, and just trusting myself to, trust that knowledge that I have and put that to use, put it to work, and let it work for me. But also, actually, I think I would piggyback on that and say my big challenge right now is celebrating myself, because I think, that being said, I'm terrible at self-promotion. And so a lot of, getting those opportunities, like, to Yolanda's point, is kind of saying like, hey, it's being that person that's saying, I'm the one, like, hey, it's me. And I have a challenge sometimes with, putting myself out there like that. And so, because I would rather for my work to speak for itself. So that's a challenge that I face, is just being the one to celebrate myself and to be vocal about what my accomplishments are and what I've done up to this point.
That's great. And for Denise, for a lot of people who are watching this, panel right now, a lot of them are just sort of starting out, and they're just kind of figuring out how they're navigating the industry and all those sort of beautiful things. But I'd love to know sort of like, what was a difficult situation that you had either on set or dealing with an exec, and how did you attack it? How did you get out of it? How did you fix it?
Why do I feel like I have all the hard questions? That is a really great question. What's interesting? The first thing that came to mind is an issue I had mostly with an executive. I think one of the hardest things about a producer is when you're like selling projects and you're taking out pitches and you're trying to set something up and you believe in it so much and you're trying to, try your damnedest through the pitch and through the presentation to, hopefully know that the studio network or execs would see that project for what you see in it and see the value. And there was an incident, or not call it an incident. There was a moment where we took a project out, and everything that this executive said about the project was just really wrong in a lot of ways, right? And wrong as in it was very clear that they either didn't read the material, or they were really trying to come up with like the most banal excuse to pass on it. And it was just very offensive in a lot of ways, right? We put our blood, sweat, and tears in this. And I always felt like I'm a very honest person. At the very least you can do in this industry is just be honest with one another and just be transparent, because I think it helps us all. And so, I really challenged them to tell the truth. And they were really kind of off guard by that. And actually, it was like bickering in a way that I was like, no, I'm just asking to be for the honesty in the past and the true note behind the note here, right? Because we're selling this project, we're taking it out. And I just didn't feel like they were being respectful to the material and to these projects and the filmmakers. And again, I say that without trying to give you too much details, mostly because it was, a little bit had to do with race, and a lot of it also had to do with culture and the significance. And I, for one, was just like, just be honest, you don't understand this culture. I don't think you get it. And I think, everything, your feedback about why this wasn't right for you was actually, it did not connect, because it was clear that they didn't understand it, if this makes any sense, right? So it was a very it was just a very offensive moment for me. And how I handled it was I stood up for myself, but I also stood up for the project, and I made sure that this executive knew what they did wrong, or at least how I was perceiving as their responses wrong. And the end result after our conversation was they sent a very, very nice and descriptive email to everyone about, some of the issues that they saw in the projects, and things that I was very respectful, and said, okay, this is actually all we needed from the beginning. I don't know why I had to wring your neck to get this, but that it was a very interesting situation, because we don't talk, I think as producers, production so much of our job, but the first part in terms of development, pitching, and selling is one of the hardest parts in this industry, right? Getting the money, getting the project set up, and having it be able to be in a position to be greenlit. And the process for that sometimes takes years in advance before it's even at that stage to even just get the project on someone's slate to begin with. And so that part for me as a producer it's an uphill battle. And I probably have many, many more stories like that dealing with executives, but it's different, because I think we often forget that this town is so it's all around people and personalities, and obviously skill sets, but day in and day out as a producer, all you're doing is having conversations and talking to people. And I think if you're looking at something to build in terms of like, how do I become a producer? Yes, you should learn how a set works. You should learn how to go make something, right? But I always say it's always most important to also just learn how to speak to people and have conversations, because your job as a producer in solving problems is just that, right? And if you can't come in and level with someone and know how to speak to them and deal with the different personalities, because everyone's different, it's a true skill, and it's something that you only learn over time by having the confidence, like Yolanda and everyone else touched on, to speak up and to know how to insert yourself in those moments. So sorry for the long response, but
no, that was perfect. That was perfect. And actually, sort of, Yolanda, my question for you is, I want you to demystify your job working, as an executive. What does it mean? What does it look like? What do you do? I think a lot of people don't really sort of understand that, your role, sort of in this whole scheme of things.
Yeah, it's a good question. I'm not on the creative executive side. I'm actually on the production executive side. So it's really very much like being, from my perspective, like being an in-house line producer. I'm working hand in hand with our, line producers on all the projects, and, it's project management and making sure, and also,
Yolanda, sorry, I want to ask you, how many projects are you working on? Right. So you're saying, but because I want people to really understand the scope.
Yeah. So it's interesting. I didn't realize how large in scope this actual position is. I've just been for 1 year, right about now is 1 year, and I didn't realize how many things. So I have scripted and unscripted specials, movies. So I have a good 25 to 30 active projects at any given time. at various stages. Some, you know, some might be prepping, some might be shooting, some might be posting, et cetera, et cetera. And then, you know, also different things that are coming up the pipeline and development. So I'm mainly trying to keep my projects on track and on plan at all times, and working in, you know, direct coordination with my team on the ground and also internally. So like, I'm doing the same thing in-house that everybody's doing at production. So I need to be in constant contact with my creative execs, you know, what's coming down the pipe, you know, what are the challenges creatively on any given, you know, episode, or, you know, are we going to be able to do this, that, or the other? You know, the COVID of it all, which we haven't touched on, turned into a huge thing. So, you know, after everything shut down, once we were coming back up, it was, how do we attack this and make sure that we can all come back and create content again safely? And what is the entire plan that is around that? And how much is it going to cost us? And all of those things. And so my job touches talent, it touches risk management and insurance, it touches scheduling, it touches budgeting. You know, in the kids and family side, obviously we work with a lot of minors, so we have a lot of considerations to deal with to make sure we're managing, you know, hours and rules around working with children and all of those things. So and then, you know, legal and clearances and, you know, negotiating agreements, all of those things that are, you know, typical to what you're doing directly at production is, you know, similarly happening in-house and in coordination and partnership. I like to be the studio executive that people like to call, Denise.
I mean, I think, you know, the reason I wanted you to really sort of talk about how much you're actually doing and overseeing is I think that people don't always understand, when you're sort of thinking about the producer side in-house, how big of a scope that really is, right? It's not just a couple different projects that you're working on. You're really sort of in charge of overseeing so much from beginning to the end, right? So I think it's fantastic.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Keeping it all in track. And then when you're talking about international, like we have some things in international, you start having to, you know, pay attention to fluctuations about foreign currency and like how that's going to affect your plan, all kinds of things like that. So
that's fantastic. I mean, and I know we have so much. I have so many questions I want to ask you guys, but there's two that I will ask, and then I, you know, have to open it up. But my next question is really sort of thinking about, and we'll ask the COVID question. I know that'll be my last one. But the next question I really want to talk about is, you know, you all are navigating film and now TV, right? Are you looking at any other platforms? And what is, you know, if you were sort of starting out right now, what kind of advice would you give, you know, a creator who's trying to figure out which one to go for? Like, do I go TV? Do I go film? Like, you know, am I thinking about podcasts? What is that, you know, what does that look like? And I'll go to you, Denise.
Yeah, I mean, I have, and I am currently producing another podcast, but I've produced podcasts in the past with Issa and most recently another podcast for HBO. But to answer your point, Moira, I think one of the most important things as you're working with any content creators is to really look at the story and the intention, and to know where the audience might be, and also to think about, you know, what do you have financially? Where is it best going to live to be seen by the most amount of people, and what's the best chance for success? And sometimes that doesn't always mean you go make a web series. It doesn't always mean you go make a pilot or you go make a film. Sometimes it is looking at the story and saying, oh, this format actually might be more enthralling and engaging as a podcast. Or we actually, you know, I always reference what Morgan Cooper did, like, which is an incredible story, which is he went and you know, decided he wanted to see a spinoff of Bel Air, and went and did a 2-minute trailer and shot it himself, and it went viral because people were like, oh, I want to see this. And next thing you know, he signed, has a 2-season order, and he's like gonna go make the show, right? And so it's like, he didn't go and decide to write a whole script himself. He didn't go and try to, you know, take on too much. He thought about what he had at his disposal. And so, you know, there's lots of ways to skin a cat. There's a lot of ways to make content. And so I think that it comes down to the story and it comes down to the resources. And between the two, you know, chances are you'll be surprised that, you know, in a world like today where there's Snapchat, where there's Instagram, where there's like there's just so many opportunities to really think about what's the best version for your project. And sometimes it could be the most basic level, which is an article, an IP, right? You can really just put a story out there through a publisher and see where it goes. So, you know, I say don't leave any stone unturned, and it really comes down to what's best for you and what's best for the project to have the most success.
That's great. And then Nina, when you think about IP, what does that mean for you? How do you like to build that IP?
I've been doing a lot of life rights. I feel like I'm like the life rights expert these days, but I actually go, you know, I'm like, wow, that story hasn't been told. And then I find out if there's an estate or next of kin, do life rights. So life rights is a form of IP, but there's also books. Books are like the big thing these days, but they're so managed by the agencies and literary agencies, and then they go into this bidding war. So if I love a book, I would need a studio to back me if I wanted to bid on it, because the bidding situation is kind of out of control these days. I think it elevated itself during the pandemic that books were the IP. So I would ask Amazon Studios to bid with me because I have a television deal there. So books are a little tougher for me to do on my own as a producer, as a production company, unless it's a property that isn't right off the New York, you know, Times, New York #1 list or whatever it is. And it's something I saw 3 years ago and nobody has it. And that's a different situation. And I have done those. And then I've seen articles. There's an article that this writing team sent it out saying, this is our vision for it. That itself is an IP, but it naturally went into the television realm, and that's developed into television, and I'm attached as part of that with, you know, a studio backer. So IP varies in different forms, but it actually gives a producer a way into a project. If you find life rights or books or articles or even a story, like if you find a very simple story that's online that wasn't developed enough, you can actually dig into it more and make that a story. And I know a producer that does that as a profession. He takes a story and actually reinvents it with a proper journalist, and then puts it out in a bona fide trade publication. Then the studios bid after it, and he's attached as a producer. He actually mastered that. And I was like learning a lot from what he does. So there's just different formats, but that IP helps a producer secure their position into the project. So every time, or if you find a filmmaker who wrote a spec script that you love, option that and then shop it around. That's your IP. You know, so, and that's how you're attached. I think as an emerging producer getting into the field, the film route might be a more, not easier, but it's a more accessible path than television. Television is a different world, you know, so.
Great. And, you know, another question for you all is, you know, we're sort of, as people are sort of getting started in this industry, or they're, you know, approaching mid-career, how do they start to think about, you know, should they be thinking about an agent? Should they be, you know, thinking about maybe getting a manager? Should they become a manager in order to be a producer? Like, what are some of the like sort of bits of advice when you're just starting out and you're just sort of trying to make your way that you would give to somebody? And I'll start with you, Avril.
I would say 2 things: build a tribe, make content, make work, build credits. You know, work begets work. You know, it's like when you start working on things, you start to develop relationships with people. I mean, most of the jobs that I get come from people that I know, people that know me, people that know of my work and either seek me out or they're seeking for someone and someone recommends me. So a lot of it is relationships. And so it's building those relationships. I would also say, you know, I think, you know, networking is important. You know, there's tons of labs that exist. I've done so many labs, that are helpful as well. I just feel like making work is the best way to go about it, and the best way to break in, the best way to be seen, and just being present. Agents and managers, they can be helpful in some ways, but especially for people starting out, I would just say, just continue making content, and continue building your tribe, because that's how you stay relevant and stay working.
Mm-hmm. I love that. And then what about you, Nina?
Okay, I'm sorry, what was the question? Sorry about
that. The question was, when you're just starting out, or you're sort of approaching mid-career, do you think about getting an agent? What advice would you sort of,
I think
kind of give? You're going to be pitching things.
Okay, yeah, producers don't really get agents, because I feel like producers got to build a relationship with agents across town, because if you're with one agent, it'll be awkward for other agents who have great talent, property, scripts that they want you to meet, but you're with a different agency. It kind of closes it off. So as a producer, I would encourage that you build a relationship with all the agencies across town, get to know them. So when they get to know you, a great script comes through, they're like, you know what, let's bring it to her, because that's how we build. Like for me as a producer, even though, we're at William Morris Endeavor, that's where Forrest is repped at, and we get the biggest support from all the agents there. But I'm also in great relationships with agents across town that way, and they know they can come to me. They're not going to go straight to Forrest, but they can come to me to assess the different IPs and scripts that's available. So don't, as a producer, I don't think you need an agent. It's really about what Avriel was talking about, building credibility in the business, having track record, and people find that you're accountable for your words. All of that will come into play when you want a certain property, an IP, or a talent that you want to work with, is the accountability. And that's one thing I love, is like, when you're out there, keep your word. Don't be one of those fast talking producers that you can do this and that. Keep your word, be accountable, be realistic, and be really honest. And also earlier talking about owning your voice, knowing that this is my path, this is the lane I'm in. When you know that's your lane, people will come to you when something falls into your lap because of the lane that you have carved out for yourself.
I love that. And I have a question from our audience, and it's really just going to be a show of hands. Which one of you has an MBA? Does anybody on our panel today have an MBA? It's not necessary, right? It's not necessary to be a producer. So that was a quick question. I knew it would be a quick answer, but go ahead, Nina. Do you have an answer for that?
I'm a master's degree, but I don't need an MBA. But that's a good question. The reason is you really should understand film finance, but it doesn't require an MBA to understand film finance. So
exactly. And then another question is, for someone who's sort of starting out as a coordinator, what are they trying to show their current bosses that when they're ready to take on more responsibilities or to start producing as well? So it's basically like, when do you know you're ready? When did you know you were ready to start producing? We'll go with you, Denise.
Sorry, I had so many questions. I'm like a production coordinator, like in an office? It sounds like this is twofold, right? I think on one hand, if you are finding yourself in a position on a set, on a company, or anywhere where you're still climbing up the ladder, so to speak, right, and you're still making your way through, I think it's imperative that obviously you're networking, you're building relationships with people in the room. And I always say, like, you should never try too hard, because whether you know it or not, people are always watching. People see the ones who get the jobs done. They see the ones who show up on time. They see the ones who do the work, right? And so make sure you're always doing the work. But outside of that space, I think it's always important not to rest all your laurels on everyone else. And so to a lot of things that we talked about today, it's like, sure, you have this let's call it 9 to 9, not a 9 to 5, throughout the work week on a TV show or on a movie, and you're doing your job as a coordinator. Well, when you're not on that movie or when you're in between jobs, you should also be stretching your own legs as a producer, right? Go and create the content like we all said, and go and experience it for yourself, because the truth is, there's no world in which you need permission for that. And so you should go and start producing whenever you can. And at some point, you'll be able to factor that experience and the things you learn into your role. And again, it'll just kind of show how much more valuable you are. And you might move up the ladder a little bit faster, right? But the traditional path to that, and the path that it sounds like this person currently is on, is, you know, from there you become the secretary, you get the production supervisor, and you work your way up through that office until ultimately you get to be a co-UPM, AUPM, that then transitions to a line producer. It is the longer route in a lot of ways, but there's a reason for it, in that you need to gain that experience in order to get to that level of responsibility. And the only way to do it is to have kind of seen it through the eyes of all positions and have done it for a while, to be honest. Right? So in a lot of ways, I'd say don't rush, but at the same time, I think you can be gaining additional experience outside of that room by going to get it yourself, and finding a way to merge the two. So I hope that was a well-rounded answer, but yes.
That was great. And I think, Yolanda, I guess, you know, also for you, I think the same question, like, what advice would you give, you know, if you're sort of have someone in your office, or just starting out, you know, and you're starting to mentor them, like, what would be your advice for them in order to get where you are?
Yeah, I kind of had a similar conversation with somebody earlier this week, which is, I agree with what Denise said, and then also a little bit about what I was indicating earlier. Like, if you have true value to contribute, you're a hard worker, you can anticipate things. Like I was offering some advice to someone who is just starting out and does want to do, you know, wants to write and direct and also produce. And so I said to him, you need to be able to see several steps ahead and anticipate that. And I gave him like a very simplistic example, which has nothing to do with producing or doing the job. I said, if you are an assistant and you're going out to get let's say you're going out to get coffee, and that's what you're doing at the time. But what does the day of the producer that you're assisting consist of? You're going to get him or her coffee, but what else is in that person's day? And where are there opportunities for you to anticipate what that person is going to need? Because they're so stretched thin of, you know, having to manage all of the pieces. If you can create value in understanding, oh, this person is booked solid from 8:30 to 6:30 or past, and there's no breathing spaces in there. If you, while you're getting coffee, or if you come back and say, oh, I know, you know, this is the kind of food you like to eat, and I know kind of about where you live and what area you're going to be in, and these are restaurants that are close by, and here are 5 menus. If you tell me which one you want to eat at and tell me what, I'll make sure that you have a meal waiting for you when you're done at 6:30, 6:45. So, because you don't have time to think about that. Now, that's something that's very simplistic, but I was like, that has not to do with the producing part, but that has to do with the part of planning and understanding everything that has to, and what somebody's having to contend with in their day. And that is applicable to so many other pieces of producing that it's, you know, it seems silly, you know, I'm talking about food, you know, food and drinks, but that's what you need to be thinking about. And you know, like plan it, you know, being a part of the process that's going to make sure that everybody who has a need, those needs are met and is serving the project, so that, you know, it can continue to be a well-oiled and fluid machine.
That's great. And, you know, we touched on it a little bit, but the sustainability question, right? It's always the fun question, but you know, when you're sort of just starting out and, you know, maybe you're working on a short film, or you're sort of, you know, doing a feature, do you pay yourself? I mean, I think it's a question. How much are you paying yourself, right? if it's something that you've kind of birthed, you've been developing this project and, you know, you're sort of feel like, but you wanted to sort of get it made. How do you, you know, sort of tell, you know, producers coming up to make sure to sort of think about themselves as well as the creative? And that's a question for you, April.
Yeah, I think as producers, we have to start getting into the mindset of paying ourselves. For so long, it's been like, oh, I'm going to make this sacrifice and it's for the film. And yeah, there's something to be said for that. But I also think that we have to kind of set a precedent for ourselves that we have to live as well. And that this has to be something sustainable, because then you get to a point where this becomes a hobby and not a career, like a job. And you know, you can kind of get in this rut where everyone else is getting something except for you. And producers work really hard. Like, producers work really hard at our job. You know, for many of us, we're there from beginning to end. And I know me personally as an independent, I kind of was like, we're gonna get it done and let's just go for it and I'm gonna give it up. But it doesn't serve you in the long run. And you know, I wish early on that even in smaller projects that I had given myself $1, you know, something just to stay in that mindset that like my time is valuable, my knowledge, my expertise is valuable, just like everyone else on the crew is valuable as well. So yeah, I say we should pay ourselves. Put something in the budget for yourself. If you know, and sometimes I know the budgets are small, but if for no other reason, just to say, I'm here, I'm here, and I'm part of this, and I'm working, and we're a team, and we're part of this together. So, yeah.
Can I add to that? I think that there's a bigger problem is because the producer title is so convoluted in our business. A lot of people don't understand what we actually do, because there are a lot of producers that get titles and people are like, well, look, they don't do anything. And that actually reflects on those of us who are just killing ourselves trying to make something happen. And I still go through negotiations where people are like, why are you getting paid? And I'm just like, I have to justify my worth still after all these years of working and producing and having a track record. And it's infuriating. And then so cut to, I'm trying to get a property, or one of my friends who's a producer is getting a property. And then they're like, well, this is a first time writer, director, and they also want a producer title. And I'm like, wait a minute. You know, so that's the problem, is because that dilutes our worth collectively. So I think as producers is we gotta clarify that, fight against that. And because the more we give away those producer titles to financiers, right? Financiers come in, we'll fund your film, and you're like, yeah, give me the money. And they're like, we want 3 producer titles. They're just like, what do I do if I don't take the money? You know, I don't have a film. All of a sudden you're giving away these producer titles, and those titles are the ones that hurt us at the end, because those titles don't take any fees, right? Because they're wealthy, they're good, but we're the ones working, breaking our backs over this. And then they're like, well, you're like those producers. Producers are all rich, right? You guys don't need to get paid. And overall, there's a bigger problem with the actual producer title. And it's like, we really gotta fight to maintain the integrity of the title and the credit.
I agree. I always say, could you imagine if everybody started, all of a sudden there were 6 directors, you know, on a project, that it would never, you know, never happen. And the other, so, I feel like we can have a whole panel on that in itself, because it does, I think it infuriates so many of us. I'm sure everybody, you know, here, because it really, then that's why you have to have that first question of what does a producer do exactly? Because people don't know anymore. You know, it's like that sort of, nobody really has an idea anymore of what it is that we do. And it becomes too murky when we actually know the work that we put into things. So I'm really glad that you raised that point, Nina. And then sort of in my last question, because we went a little bit over, but I do have one last question for you all, even though we didn't get to have the COVID question, because this is still, for me, a really important question, which is when you're developing projects, right? When is it enough? number one? And when do you decide to walk away from a project that you actually, really love? Like what advice would you give somebody in terms of the turning point? Because, as producers, we kind of have to juggle so many different things, right? To kind of keep it moving. But at some point you can't juggle 30 things if you're one person. So what does that look like? What does development look like for you all? And you can go ahead, Nina, we'll start with you.
I think that development is kind of a science. I think for many of us who are in the process, it's a science, it's a process. It takes so much time and effort and brain power to get it right. And it's such a collective effort on the creative level. But sometimes, sometimes I said I should have followed my gut in getting into a project because I had doubts already, but I really like the people and I feel kind of bad. And then now I'm spending so much time doing something that I don't love. And then at a certain point, you're just like, I gotta walk away because it's eating all my time up. And I need to focus on more important projects that are close to my heart. So there's that situation. And there are situations where you're like, wow, this team is amazing. This project is amazing. As you're developing with the team, also you feel like, we have different sets of values. We gotta go, So there are those times where you just I gotta leave, So, but when is it enough? I feel like on the studio level, we always hear about development hell. They could develop a screenplay forever, for years, and that's a system issue in itself. But if you're an independent and develop, I think that I always say, if I could develop something where I feel I'm about 80% there, I feel pretty good about it, I would go out to the market either for financing or a setup at a studio to test the market to the executives that I know that I can trust and say, what do you think? I know I'm not 100% there. It's about 80% with this filmmaker. It could work. Are you in line with me? So you can start testing the market, and also getting fresh eyes on it. When you're close to a project for so long, you think it's the greatest thing. You got to get a pair of fresh eyes, your fellow producers, to come in and say, can you take a look at this? Am I crazy? So it's having a trusted network of good friends, or anything that, like for me, that is culturally specific. But if it's not part of my culture, I always have a second, third, fourth pair of eyes and say, can you take a look at this? Is this right? There was a project that was Asian, but then they really talked about Black culture, and I was like so uncomfortable with it, right? I'm like, is this appropriation? So I would bring my African-American friends and I go, can you guys take a look at this? Am I crazy? and then I could get a second, third, fourth opinion. I'm like, oh, it's not right. I walk away, So it's having, but it's having your circle of trust in people and you believe in their taste. It's like something I learned is you can't teach taste. So you look at people's projects and what they work on, and you're like, and if they're part of your group, you go to them and go, what do you think about this? Is there something here? And it's not about revealing any secret. It's about getting honest opinions from people that you believe, you love their taste, and you have a trust level to give you an honest opinion. But development could be such a trap for many of us, and we just have to really learn to let go and say, this one is not working. I can't spend any more time on it. So
that's great. Denise?
Yeah, I mean, totally echo everything that Nina said. And if I were to add it, I think the hardest ones that I've had to walk away from are the ones that just never got there in development, right? And especially when, there's oftentimes you might develop something that starts from a pitch. And so you don't have anything on the page. And so you go through the pitch to the outline to the script, and you'll get all the way down the line, maybe a year or two and some change into it. And, the script just is not working, right? The story is just not working. Or there's actually been a time where the pitch was great, and then when the execution came around for the script, you were like, oh, this is a different project that we thought we were buying into, because the translation did not stick, or we totally, the tone and the pitch was different than what they're telling me on the page. This is not funny. It's supposed to be a comedy. Those kind of things happen, right? And the hardest thing is to decide when to walk away and when to stop wasting your time, in a so to speak, because as producers, I mean, Yolanda mentioned what's on her slate. It's like we are covering multiple projects at any time at different stages, right? And so, in a lot of ways, it's like it's unfair for you to take on more in your bandwidth to continue to work on a project that you know is just not going to work, or you know is not going to get to a place that you can sell it or that you can even execute, right? And you have to be honest about yourself, and you have to know what that is about not working. I think oftentimes people just want to be nice, and they don't want to, they don't want to hurt people's feelings, or they don't want to, hurt that filmmaker writer's feelings who's been working and putting their blood, sweat, and tears. And honestly, it's one of the most heartbreaking things. I hate nothing more than to let a project go because you know how hard they worked on it. But you know what we try to do, especially when we love the person, is to find something else, right? And you always just say, you know what, this is just not the one for us, and it's not getting to where it goes, or sometimes mandates change. But at the end of the day, we still love you, and we still want to find something else. And sometimes we'll even come up with the project in our back pocket that we've already been secretly thinking of them for. But in a lot of ways, again, I think it's to what Nina was saying. It's about being honest with yourself, and it's about knowing what that threshold is to where you're just going to say this has got to go. And it's so important. Don't take on the extra work if you don't need it, to be honest.
That's great. And then Yolanda, my question to you is, when you're working, sort of across so many different projects, and you're also working with a number of different, producers, directors, like, what do you think that is a common mistake that you see sort of like up and coming, production people are sort of making, somebody sort of either a coordinator or a line producer that you're working with? What's sort of a mistake that you see that they make that you feel that somebody could just sort of learn from as they're doing their work? Not a personality mistake, but really sort of some mistakes as they're doing their work that you think somebody on this panel can learn, not on the panel, but our audience could actually learn from.
I mean, I kind of have this thing where I say you have to be, I feel like all of the work, like a lot of directors will say, the movie is made in casting. And if you cast really well, you have a great, your movie's going to be great because you have the right people in those roles. And like, no matter what else, you're going to get these great performances. And I kind of feel the same way in approach to my own work. Like, it is super important for me to cast all the roles, meaning make sure you're putting excellent people in all the positions who understand their job, and then just let them go and do their job. You don't need to be all in the weeds. And it's as producers, so much of what we need to do is to solve problems, but we should really only be needing to insert ourselves into doing that when something really is impassable. Like, you can't figure it out, like something's going on, maybe there's a, personality conflict. Those things kind of come up, but I feel like a lot of people spend too much time in kind of inserting themselves and feeling like they need to be a part of the process. So to me, that says, then you didn't cast that person well, because if you need to be so involved in it, that means that they're not the right person to do that job. So that's I often say to the people that I collaborate with, I was like, if you're not hearing from me, that means you're doing the bang up job. Like, you're not going to hear from me. I'm not going to be calling you all the time. Like, and that's a good thing. Like, that actually frees me up to make sure that I'm covering the things that do require my attention. So, I mean, that's kind of my advice to people is, yeah.
Fantastic. And my last question, my last really sort of thought is, number one, I want to say thank you all so much for joining us for this incredible panel. I feel it was incredibly informative, just sort of, watching the chat. People are really sort of loving your answers, and thank you so much for being so open. But I think one thing that I think we sort of touched on a little bit, but I think that we don't really do enough is champion ourselves, yes, but also sort of champion others, right? I think that we do it in our own little way, but we don't do it enough. So as our goodbye right now, I would love for you to all name one female producer or producer who you feel that people should know about. right? For me, I always say Trevitt Willis. Trevitt is like, I love Trevitt. I think she's an incredible producer, and she's somebody that a lot of people don't really know, and she's done so much incredible work. So who would be somebody that you would name that, especially for, these young, producers starting out, should be like looking up and sort of paying attention to? And we'll start with you, Nina.
So I would say there's a young woman named Kimberly Parker. She's a Korean American. She was the exec producer and line producer on The Last Black Man in San Francisco. She's NYU grad, strong producer. And she's in the weeds, just, trying to sustain her career as a producer. And I've been watching her. Whenever I get a chance, I check in with her. What are you working on? She's always on something. But I know that she's going to come up really strong. And that's somebody I would really love to see rise. And given her skill sets, she's just so strong.
Love it. April?
I was totally going to say Trevitt Willis. She was on my list. Another person I would say is Haria Muhammad. Haria produced a film called Farewell Amor, which played at Sundance last year, I believe. And it was just one of the most beautiful films I've ever seen. And she's just a wonderful person. She does a lot of work with Black TV and Film Collective, and is a great producer. So I would say Haria Muhammad.
Great. Yolanda?
I would say Angela Northington. She actually has had a lot of experience in the space across licensing materials, but she has now gone out on her own and created her own endeavor in Entertainment Speakers Bureau, and is producing content now, a lot of digital content in the travel industry, as well as also executive coaching type materials, and also narrative digital content. So I would say Angela.
Great, I love it. And last but not least, Denise.
I would say the first person that came to mind was Carolina Grappa. She's an amazing UPM line producer. She's Latinx, Brazilian. Most recently was the UPM on Sylvie's Love, and is very much spreading her wings and getting a lot more independent work in a world that doesn't see a lot of her like her. A lot of people like her in, and also what's really interesting is she worked her way up through production. So when we talked about climbing the traditional ladder, that's something that she did, and I just have so much respect, and I'm very, very excited to see like where her career shifts in this next coming year.
I love it. I love it. Thank you all so much for joining us, Women in Film. I don't know if Mike Hiko, if you're going to come back, but thank you so much for joining us. And it was a great panel. Thank you so much.
Yes, thank you all so much for this incredible panel. So much energy, vibrance, amazing responses in the chat. I hope you all saw them. It was so lovely to be in a space as we continue the virtual world, to know that the work is happening, right? And we have this incredible list of women that you all have just amplified, and that really is the work of WIF as well. So thank you all for your continued work. We're so excited to keep collaborating with you. We love producers. We need you all so much. And we'll see you very soon. Thanks, everyone. Have a great night.
Thanks
Bye,
for
guys.
having us.
Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.